Hi, and welcome to another of our Jewelry Art Hazards YouTube videos. In this one, we'll be talking about soldering and brazing hazards. And we're focusing on chemical exposures in these. So the fact that it's really hot and can burn you is not going to be the primary focus here. So first off, the very first thing to focus on, and probably the greatest risk to your health from doing soldering and brazing, is if you're working with flammable gases, make sure that your connections are nice and tight and you're not getting any leaks, because the last thing you want to do is set fire to your gas cylinder or burn up your studio. Keep in mind that propane is heavier than air, so though the gases may leak down and flow across the floor. So you want to make sure that your connections are tested. You can use some bubble, the bubble solution that's used for blowing bubbles. If you see any bubbles, then you need to get those connections fixed. Okay, so first thing to understand about soldering is when you see that smoke coming off of the part you're working on, that smoke is actually really ultra fine dust. Very, very fine particles. And the smaller a particle is, the deeper it can get down into your lungs. If they're fine enough, like a smoke, these will get so far down in your lungs that they really don't come out very well. The other thing is anything that gets into your lungs is going to get absorbed into your bloodstream. That's the job of the lungs. It's taking air or anything else you breathe in and getting that right into your bloodstream. So any chemicals that are in that smoke are going to get into your bloodstream. So we want to be careful to not have any more toxic materials in there as possible, and also to try to keep as much of that smoke out of our lungs as possible. So what are some of the hazardous metals that we're concerned about that could be in your solder? Nickel is a carcinogen by inhalation and a skin sensitizer. Lead is a neurotoxin, and cadmium is a carcinogen by inhalation. Many artists are no longer using lead solder when they're doing soldering work, but they may have switched to a cadmium-nickel solder. You can get cadmium-free and lead-free solder, and those are the ones that we recommend as a less hazardous alternative. So some of the metal fumes that are released in soldering or brazing include lead or cadmium or silver or nickel. These, even though they're toxic, may not be a problem as long as you have good ventilation that's pulling all of that smoke away from you and getting it outside of your building. One of the things to be careful of, which may be the most toxic component of soldering, is the flux that you're using. If you have a fluoride-based flux, these fluoride compounds, when they're heated, are toxic and can cause bone and teeth defects if you're inhaling enough of them. So what we want you to do is use a fluoride-free, borax-based flux. You should be able to look on the label of the product that you're thinking about buying and see if it contains the word contains fluoride or has the words fluoride-free. You always want to select a fluoride-free flux. Another thing you may be using chemicals for would be for deburring or polishing or buffing. Here's an example, the Super Sunshine non-chelating deburring compound. It does have a warning on it that says to avoid contact with eyes and skin and clothing. So there is some concerns about this. But it looks like in that case, if you wear proper clothing, it should be gloves, you should be okay. Tripoli, if you're working with it, contains crystalline silica, so you don't want to breathe in any dust, although typically there's very little dust that gets released from this. But crystalline silica has been linked with lung cancer. It's something you don't want to be inhaling. And one of the things you can, to understand how hazardous it is, if we look at exposure limits for this stuff, this 0.05, that's an incredibly low number. So this is milligrams, or like a grain of sand is about a milligram. So we're taking that and cutting it into 20 pieces, and that is how much would be allowed over the course of a day in 1,000 liters of air surrounding you while you're working. Incredibly low concentration. So you really don't want to be inhaling any of this silica if you can avoid it. If you're doing any buffing, you may be using a cerium buffing compound. We've done some analyses of this material, and we found as much as 1,000 parts per million arsenic in a cerium as a contaminant. So again, if this is a buffing compound and there's dust from this, please try not to inhale it, since arsenic has been linked to cancer from inhalation. And that's it on the soldering. There's not a lot of complexity there. Good ventilation will take care of almost all of the problems we're seeing. And remember, go for those fluoride-free fluxes. Stay tuned if you want to see another YouTube video on another topic in jewelry hazards. We have them coming up.